Everyone, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sarah Marshall, who's a incredibly well-known, prolific travel writer in the UK. She's been to more countries than anyone I know and is incredibly worldly wise. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah to start her presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello everyone, and apologies again for the technical hitches, but hopefully it'll all be worthwhile. So thank you so much for tuning in, and it's great to see so many of you are interested in learning more about traveling to Bhutan. Now, it's one of my favorite destinations, and I hope I can share some of my passion with you today. So as Sam mentioned before, throughout the presentation, I'm happy for you to post any questions using the chat function. I'll do my best to answer them either during the presentation or at the end. Okay, so a little bit about me. So Sam very kindly introduced me. I'm a freelance travel writer. I work for The Telegraph, The Times in the UK, also Condé Nast Traveller and National Geographic Traveller. Now, I first came into contact with Sam and YellowWood in 2019 when I was writing a story about the Goralta Mountains in Ethiopia. I traveled with Sam and we've been friends ever since. And I've also helped YellowWood build some of their itineraries. So I'm very familiar with the company. In terms of Bhutan, I first traveled to the destination about 10 years ago. So quite a long time. A lot has changed since then. I've since been back to write several stories. And this picture here is of me on the Trans-Bhutan Trail. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And today, I just want to give you a bit of an introduction into why I think Bhutan is so special. I'll be using my own personal experiences, also some images that I've taken and images that my partner, a professional photographer, that he's taken as well. And hopefully I'll inspire some of you to come out and visit as well. Okay, so first of all, where is Bhutan? It's a tiny landlocked country, a Buddhist kingdom that's sandwiched between these huge giants of China and India. And you can see just where that red arrow is pointing. It's that tiny little orange dot there. The terrain is a mixture of forest and snow-capped peaks, and the elevation ranges quite dramatically from about 200 meters right up to 7,000. But most of the time, if you're visiting as a tourist, you'll be around 1,000 to 3,000 meters. So it's nothing to get stressed about. It's a tiny population. There are less than 800,000 people living in the country. And that's a place that's smaller than Switzerland and about roughly the size of the US state Indiana. Now, there are 20 different districts. Those are on the map on the right-hand side there. These are called dzongkhags, and you can see the main ones I've put an arrow on with a black arrow there, Paro, Thimphu, and Punakha. Those are some of the key districts where a lot of the tourism activity takes place. And then further over in the east, in Bumtang, where the white arrow is, that's about as far east as most tours tend to go. Okay, so how do you get there? It's quite a difficult place, but actually fairly straightforward to reach. So the main entry point is Paro. That's the main city in the main town in Paro district. And it happens to be one of the most challenging airport landings in the world. I've done it several times, and it's quite spectacular as you come in through the mountains, and you're sort of slightly nervous, but these pilots know exactly what they're doing, but it is a fantastic experience. There are two main airlines, the national carrier Druk Air and a private airline called Bhutan Airlines. So most people will come via Delhi, and it's also possible to go via Bangkok or Kathmandu in Nepal. And if you take that route, you'll also have the bonus of getting a fantastic view of Everest on a clear day. And more recently, Druk Air started flying via Dubai. So when to go? Well, generally speaking, the best times to visit are spring and autumn. So spring being March to May and autumn September to November. So in March and May, flowers are blooming, the ice is melted, you've got fantastic clear views. A month later, in April, the rhododendrons start to bloom, and that's a really good time for bird watching as well. Then at the beginning of September, it's slightly crisp and bright days, and that's the beginning of autumn. And then October tends to be one of the most popular times to trek, and that's because the temperatures are much cooler, really clear skies and fantastic views. Now, the dates you travel might also be dictated by festivals, and I'm going to talk a bit about those later. So what is the SDF? Now, this is a really controversial topic, so I thought it was worth spending a bit of time to explain it. So the SDF, that's essentially the Sustainable Development Fund, and this was introduced by the Bhutanese government as a tourism levy. So it was essentially a foundation for sustainable tourism and to avoid over-tourism. The money was invested, or still is invested, into improving infrastructure, services, protecting the environment. And that animal you can see there, that's a takin. He's one of the beneficiaries, and he's a sort of goat stroke antelope that you'll find in Bhutan. So the reason it was controversial is because it was initially set at $200 per person per day, which is quite a painful amount of money. But in 2023, that was reduced by half, which makes it far more appealing and much easier for a lot of people to visit the destination. But it is worth mentioning that that rate isn't forever. It's going to remain in place until the end of August 2027. And then after that, there will be a review. So there is a chance it could go up. The reason being that if tourism figures grow, and they are growing, if they rise above 300,000 per year, then there will be a need to try and reduce that number again. And one way to do that is by increasing the levy. So what it does mean is now is a really great time to visit. So what makes Bhutan so special? Well, there are many, many reasons. I've just picked out a few of the things that make it special to me. So first of all, it's the environment. 71% of the country is covered by forests, and a minimum of 60%, sorry, is constitutionally mandated. So what that means is it's not going to disappear anytime soon. The Bhutanese take their environment really seriously, and they're very committed to protecting it. And you can see that. And it's so refreshing in a world where not every country seems to be following that route, sadly. But when you arrive in Bhutan, you'll see there are no skyscrapers. There are no industrial developments, no big billboards anywhere. 95% of the country's electricity actually comes from hydropower. And the combination of those factors led to Bhutan being named the world's first carbon negative country. That was back in 2017. What that means is they're actually absorbing more carbon through the forest than they're actually producing. So just to give you an example of how wild Bhutan is, it's a country filled with wildlife. There are tigers, there are takins, the animal I just showed you, and snow leopards. But there's no exploitation of wildlife for tourism. So you're not going to see specific wildlife tours. The belief being that the animals should be allowed to exist peacefully. There are also peaks that nobody has ever climbed. And that's quite remarkable in our day and age. Peaks that no one's climbed for fear of upsetting spiritual balance. And it's also the only country in the world without traffic lights. So in the 1990s, the authorities installed some lights in the capital, Thimphu, but they were quickly removed because residents complained they were too stressful. And they were instead replaced by a white-gloved policeman. And you can see him in this picture here. He sort of stands and directs the traffic. And it's, of course, a very popular stop for tourism photos. Secondly, the other reason why I think Bhutan is so special is because wealth is measured in happiness. So we've all heard of Bhutan as being this real-life Shangri-La. So what are the roots of that? Well, in 1629, Bhutan's ancient legal code declared that if the government cannot create happiness for its people, there is no purpose for the government to exist. Imagine if lots of other governments felt that way. Wouldn't it be a great world? Well, in the 1970s, the king decided to make gross national happiness, known as GNH, more important than gross domestic product, GDP. So what that means is that today, all of the government policies are evaluated on how they impact GNH level. That means free healthcare, free education, and thirdly, a commitment to conservation and culture. So it's not unusual to see people wearing national dress. That's still observed. Tradition is hugely respected as well. And one of the final reasons I think it's so important, so special to visit Bhutan is because tourism is so young. It only started in 1974. So this is really still a relatively undiscovered part of the world. And just to put that into perspective, last year, the number of tourists only reached about 145,000. So for comparison, in Italy last year, there were 60 million tourists. And I double checked that figure and it is correct. So quite a difference. Okay, so festivals. I promised I'd come to the festivals. So Bhutan is probably best known for these. They're also known as sheshus, and you might see it written in that way. And they're multi-day events happening across the country. And they celebrate everything from religious figures to rhododendrons to blackneck cranes. There are dozens of them, but they all involve mass dances, music, and rituals. There's even a naked festival that takes place. As yet, YellowWood don't run any tours to that one, but it's always available on request. But I have listed some of the key festivals for this year. So there are two taking place in April, one in Paro and then the Rhododendron Festival. And there are two in October in Thimphu and Gangte. And YellowWood are actually running tours to both those festivals. And then there's a final one in November. Those are just the ones we've selected, the November being the Black-Necked Crane Festival, but there are many, many others, and we can arrange tours to any of the ones you're interested in. So the festival I'm going to talk a little bit about today is the Paro Festival. This was the festival I attended about 10 years ago on my first visit to Bhutan. And as I mentioned, this year it's taking place from the 8th to the 12th of April. So as I said before, Paro is where the international airport is based. So it's really easy to access. And you can either top and tail your trip, either end with a trip to Paro, very easy. So this particular event honors Guru Rinpoche, and you'll hear a lot about him because he's the founder of Buddhism in Bhutan, so a very important figure. And the event's been taking place since the 17th century. It's held in the courtyard of the Paro Dzong, and you can see that pictured here. That's that big white building above the river. And Dzong is a sort of fortress and a monastery and an administrative center, and you'll find them all across Bhutan. And you can see here in the courtyard some of the festivities taking place. So mass dances, as I mentioned, are a real highlight of these events. All of them tell different stories from Bhutanese mythology. And many are actually common to the different festivals. So you might see the same dance repeated in other festivals throughout the year. They all seem to involve terrifying deities. You just have to look at those masks. They're all quite frightening. I'll be honest, following the story can be a little bit tricky, but to me, it was more about the spectacle, seeing all this color and this movement. And just to give you an idea of a couple of the stories that take place, there's a revenge tale where a prince chops off the nose of his lover, and another where a man saves a stag from hunting dogs and converts them to Buddhism. So all quite imaginative. Now, these dancers, what amazed me most about them was the skill and the poise and the elegance. And they're whirling and spinning and wearing these really heavy outfits. And I actually lifted up one of the masks just to see how much they weighed. And they can weigh up to about 10 kilograms. So pretty heavy. And for protection, you can see this dancer here. He's got like a towel underneath his chin. And they often wear pads on either side of the face as well. But it's not just about the performers, it's also about the audience. And I loved people watching. Actually, I'd spend some time at the festival, just sat down, having a look at who was coming in. You can see here, everybody's in their national dress, all really dressed up for the event. And these festivals aren't shows for tourists. These are events that people in the country attend, and they're really important. And I even actually, while I was in the crowd, saw the king turn up. And that was quite incredible. He came in, sat down amongst the people, and that really demonstrates just how close the relationship is between the king and his people. Because although Bhutan is a democracy, the king's word is still very much respected. And you'll often find people wearing little pin badges with pictures of the king on. So he's quite a pop star. And the other thing that really surprised me is that although this is a very spiritual event, it's not at all pious. In fact, it's actually, there are moments of humor and entertainment. And that's something that really shocked me, and I wasn't expecting at all. But the Bhutanese have a really wicked, almost bawdy sense of humor. And you can see here, this devil, he's walking around and he's hitting people on the head with a phallus-shaped truncheon, which caused all sorts of sniggers from the audience. And he kind of reminded me a bit of a court jester in a medieval court. And now the phallus, beyond being quite funny, is actually a very important symbol in Bhutanese culture. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more on that later. So the grand finale of the Paro Festival happens on the final day, and it involves the unveiling of a thangka. And this is an enormous silk applique of Guru Rinpoche and his many manifestations. And it's been embroidered since the 18th century, but every year new bits are renewed and added. So what happens in the middle of the night on the final day, people arrive in the Zong and they carry this thangka all the way down to the courtyard. And I stayed up to watch this, and there's a huge fanfare of trumpets and musicians. They then hang it to a wall. I stayed up all night to watch all the proceedings. There'll be candles lit, monks will be chanting, and it's an incredible atmosphere. And I recommend, if you have the chance, definitely do that. Because then, as the first rays of light appear at dawn, finally the thangka is unveiled. And you can see it here in the picture. It's enormous, covers that entire wall. And as soon as it's such a huge response from the audience, as soon as they see it. Then everybody queues up and has an opportunity to give offerings and receive blessings. And there'll be a whole mixture of people. You'll have monks, you'll have dignitaries, and tourists are welcome. So I went up as well. And just to give you an idea of how heavy and how big that scroll is, these are some men carrying it back the following day once it's been folded away. Okay, so I mentioned before the Trans-Bhutan Trail. Probably one of the most exciting attractions in Bhutan that's appeared in modern times. It was launched after the pandemic in 2022, and it's been described as one of the world's greatest walking routes. I was able to attend the launch, and I was actually one of the first people to walk a section of the trail. I joined the Prime Minister and several other people from government. The whole thing was actually opened by a royal ceremony where we gave blessings, asked the spirits to protect the pathway, and then we were able to trek. So the whole route is pretty long. You can see here it extends all the way across the country. It's about 403 kilometers in total. It starts in Ha in the west and ends in Trashigang in the east. But it's broken down into many manageable sections. So nobody, or very few people, do the full thing. It is possible, but most people will do smaller parts. So just to give you an idea, this is the trail that YellowWood offer. So what we do is take you to some of the most scenic sections, and then we'll drive with hotel stays in between. But it'll be really to give you an idea of the best parts of the trail and the significance of it and the importance of it. So I mentioned before, it's a new concept, but actually the history of the trail goes back to the 16th century. It's a network of routes which once connected zongs, those military fortresses I mentioned before. And it was used by people known as GARPs. They were essentially postal messengers who would apparently run faster than the wind to pass messages between these important administrative centres. But it wasn't only for politics, it was also used by regular people as a means of trading between villages. Because remember, there were no roads at that point. This was the only way to exchange products. And it was also a pilgrimage route to Tibet. So there are some scholars that believe that the trail also played a really important role in uniting Bhutan and actually formed the foundation of it as a nation in 1907. And this was because by being so united, any aggressors were kept out. And really, there was a thinking of being one nation from much, much earlier than the 1900s. However, when roads arrived in the 1960s, and again, that's quite late, but there was no more use for these routes. They fell into disrepair and were largely forgotten. Now, if we rush forward a few years, in 2018, the king had an idea, along with the Bhutan Canada Foundation and the Tourism Council of Bhutan, to restore these routes. And the idea wasn't just to make it a tourist attraction, but this was a way to try and reconnect Bhutanese youth with their historic culture so that people wouldn't forget the birthplace of the nation, essentially. So how was it done? Well, there were a team of about 900 furloughed Bhutanese workers. They were all out of work, so this was COVID time, so they were mobilized and put to work on the trail. And this was done voluntarily, so people were all happy to help out. And the achievements are quite incredible. I've just got some statistics here to give you an idea. 18 bridges were built, 10,000 stone steps were cut by hand, and this was done over 115,000 feet of elevation, and that was all in 36 months. And probably there is no other country where that would happen. It was really down to the commitment of the people. And you can see these workers here wearing kind of orange jumpsuits. They're part of a project called Disung. They're also known as Guardians of the Peace. It's voluntary. And one guide told me that these people do it purely for the love of the king and country, and that's enough. And that's Bhutan. Essentially, things happen because people are so committed to their community, to one another, and to their monarchy. So the section, I'm going to show you a little bit about the parts of the trek that I did. We started the point for this trek at 3,000 meters above sea level, and this is the Dodgila Pass, and it's a crossroads between east and west, and a really important stopping place for a lot of tours, actually, for a lot of people traveling across the country. What you can see here in the middle are 108 chortens, and these are memorial stones, and they're arranged in circles to commemorate soldiers killed in a war against Indian insurgents in 2003. But as well as being a very peaceful and contemplative site, it also has fantastic views of the surrounding mountains, so it's a really beautiful place to stop. So what can you expect to see on the trail? Well, for me, one of the highlights was going through the forests. It looks like a fairy tale, if I'm honest. I loved it, all these ferns and mushrooms and lichens draping from trees. And it felt like the place where legends are invented. And there are lots of crazy tales. Any of the Bhutanese will sit down and tell you about these stories of demonesses eating men and stupas inspired by shrunken turnips. Honestly, it's stranger than anything you could imagine by the Brothers Grimm. It's quite imaginative stuff. And there are also, as I mentioned before, a number of historical artifacts that can be seen along the way. These were all restored as part of the project. And there are guides will give you information about each of these and just an explanation on how these signposts were so important during those trading periods. And this is another section of the route. This is from the Pelela Pass in central Bhutan. And those sort of yellowy green fields you can see are all mustard seeds. They create a beautiful patchwork of colour as you're walking through. And this is really an area where you can see daily life unfolding. That might be people drying chilies on tin roofs held down with stones, or houses where the basement floor is still used to keep cows. So it's a real insight into local life. And for me, that was one of the greatest joys of the trail. It was that opportunity to spend time with local people. And that was one of the important intentions, actually, when the king came up with the idea of creating the trail. It was also really to help rural communities benefit from tourism, both domestic and international tourism. And so there are opportunities for guests on the trail to stop in farmhouses for lunch, and you can sit down and listen to stories from local people. Many of them will actually remember using the trail. And I met one woman who told me her grandparents had met, and that's quite a common story, actually, that people would have met and married by exchanging goods on the trail. And then there was another elderly man that I met, and he was really nostalgic. He recalled these camping trips that he'd have while trading and all the parties that they'd have all night. And he told me, honestly, he wished he could go back and do it all over again. And in terms of flora and fauna, now you can expect to see a lot of wildflowers. You might see some yaks. I saw quite a few langur monkeys, and you will probably most definitely see cows. That said, our trail was actually diverted after news that there were Bengal tigers on the route. So as I said before, those animals are around. Okay, Hobjika Valley, Gante. This is probably my favorite place in Bhutan, and so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it. It's a vast U-shaped valley in the center of the country, and it's got one of the most beautiful and impressive and atmospheric ancient Buddhist monasteries, and you can see a picture of that here. And it's also a very important overwintering site for black-necked cranes. And these are birds, you can just sort of see them faintly in the other image. They migrate from Tibet. They come in late October and they leave in mid-February. And according to local legend, they circle the monastery 3 times before they land. So their arrival is celebrated with the Black-necked Crane Festival, which I mentioned before, and that happens in November. And it features a very special dance of dancers mirroring the elegance of these birds. The reason there's a festival is because these birds are sacred to the Bhutanese people, and they have a really strong cultural significance. They're linked to longevity and with prosperity. And farmers believe that the arrival of the birds will promise a good harvest. So really, really important creatures. The monastery itself is also very interesting. I spent some time visiting during prayers and meditation. And for me, it was one of the most memorable experiences of monasteries that I have in Bhutan. There's also a very strange little museum, and apparently it's believed to house a mummy of the Yeti, although nobody is allowed to enter, so that just remains a legend for most. Okay, so this is a really traditional and spiritual area, and that makes it a really good place to sample some Bhutanese traditions. One of the ones I really enjoyed was a hot stone bath. I haven't got a picture of it here, but basically it's a bath using stones, big granite stones taken from the river. Those are heated on a fire, placed in the water to keep it warm. And then the water is infused with Artemisia absinthium, which is also known as wormwood. And it's believed it alleviates aches, pains, and all sorts of ailments. The other tradition that's really fun and interesting to do is having your fortune told. So this is my fortune teller here. Fortune telling is a bit like going to the doctor or the dentist in Bhutan. Everybody does it. It's so important for your mental well-being. And if anyone has a really big problem or they need to make an important life decision, they will go to their fortune teller. So a lot of what the fortune teller does is based on astrology. You'll need to share the year of your birth, the name of your parents. Fortune teller then will flick through his booklets and his readings. There's a lot of scratching in the sand, throwing of dice. And some monks, some fortune tellers, sorry, will tell you a little bit about what might happen in later years. This particular fortune teller agreed to answer any of my questions. Now, the thing is, these questions are binary questions, so ones with a simple yes or no answer. So you have to think really carefully about what you're asking. From recollection, I asked things like, would I travel? Would I be happy? You can see my priorities there. I did think about asking whether I'd ever be rich, but I think I know the answer to that one. Okay, so again, this is a great place to understand rural communities. And these are some of the images I took while I was in the area of different people we met along our route. So during the winter months, many of the yak herders will come down from the highlands and they'll graze their yaks. And you'll often find women selling products, beautiful scarves along the road. One of the other items you're going to see a lot of in Bhutan is hard cheese. And this lady up in the photo here, she's selling garlands of hard cheese, which you buy and then nibble on. Just to give you an idea of what they taste like, I found some of my old notes, and I'd written in my book, it had the perversely addictive flavor of Parmesan rind and the texture of an old leather boot. So there you go, one to try. Okay, now as Bhutan modernizes, inevitably yak farming is dying out. You can't halt change. But to try and stop this rural depopulation, the government has introduced a licensing scheme which permits only highlanders from certain regions to harvest one of the country's most bizarre but most lucrative exports. And that is cordyceps. And you can see a picture of these, the lady yak herder is holding them in her hand. There's a close-up image of them. So for about 2,000 years, these have been highly coveted in traditional medicine. They're considered to boost your immune system, to give you energy, and they're one of the many natural remedies found in Bhutan. And it's worth mentioning, this was a country which was once called the medicine cabinet of the Himalayas. So what are cordyceps? The Chinese call them winter worm summer grass. Now, essentially, and I'll explain this slowly because it's quite bizarre, it's a parasitic fungus that grows on an underground ghost moth larvae. So what happens? The fungus takes control of the little caterpillars under the ground. It destroys their nervous system, forces them to dig upwards. The fungus then remains dormant throughout winter. And then in the springtime, it awakens. It consumes the corpse's interior for nutrients, and then it sprouts out of the caterpillar's head. So harvesting these things is actually really quite painstaking and occasionally quite dangerous. And it involves crawling on your hands and knees and looking for little slithers hanging from a blade of grass. But it's worth it because they can fetch up to $110,000 per kilogram. So the tiger's nest. I have to talk about the tiger's nest because this is probably the most iconic site in Bhutan. You'll recognize it from multiple images. It's a monastery clinging to the cliffs. And although the climb is very steep, it's easy to access, and it's close to Paro Airport. It's in Paro. So again, really easy to tie into an itinerary. So why is it so famous? Well, it was built in 1692, and it surrounds the cave where Guru Rinpoche, remember him, we mentioned him earlier, where he first meditated in the 8th century. And according to legend, he flew here on the back of a tigress. He meditated in a cave for 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 hours, and then brought Buddhism to Bhutan. So the whole trip to reach the monastery is about 6 kilometers there and back. And it's steep, but it's a really well-maintained pathway. And there is the option to use donkeys as well. There are stops along the way. There are prayer flags festooning the forest, and there's even a cafe if you get really tired. And one thing I wanted to point out, you'll probably see on that trail, and actually in many places in Bhutan, are these little cylindrical cones, and they're known as tsatsas. And you'll often see them in cave shelters or tucked into little nooks of rocks. What they are, they're memories of loved ones, lost loved ones, people who have died, and they've been molded from ash taken from a crematorium pyre. They're really very colourful and quite beautiful, and they've got quite a spiritual significance. So when you reach the monastery, when you've got the final ascent, there's also a chance to meet a lot of the monks who are training there, because this isn't a museum piece, this is a working monastery. You can wander through the temples, you can witness prayers, you can witness meditation taking place, and you can visit the cave where the tigress landed. People are very happy, as they always are in Bhutan, to chat with you, to pose for photos. And I really enjoy just sitting down, watching people, breathing in the incense and taking in the whole atmosphere. And I'd recommend you do the same. So finally, the phallus. I promised I'd come back to this. It is probably Bhutan's most comical and unexpected religious icon, and it is everywhere. Honestly, you'll find it on key rings, on candles, in souvenir stalls, as little sculptures, as you can see here. It is all over the place. So what is it? Well, you'll often see it actually most commonly daubed on buildings as a form of protection. And it sort of reminded me of a bit like a schoolboy's pencil case. They're quite cartoonish in nature, but they do have important meanings. And there are several different versions. There's one with an evil eye. There's one with a scarf to eliminate sins. And there is another with a moustache, and he subjugates demons. But the one here, the sort of skirting one, is the most popular, and that's used by couples struggling to have children. So beyond the humor, there is a strong spiritual background to this symbol. And the origins of the story are connected to Drukpa Kunli. He was an unconventional and unorthodox 15th century monk, and he was also known as the Divine Madman. You'll hear a lot about him when you go to Bhutan. He was famous for wielding his great thunderbolt of flaming wisdom, and you make of that what you will. He's celebrated at this temple here. It's called Chimney Lakkang, and it's the fertility temple. You'll find it in Punakha, and any woman who wants to a child will visit this temple if she's struggling to conceive. There's a big wooden phallus. She's invited to pick it up, put it over her shoulder, and walk around the temple 3 times. I did not try it myself, but I am told it works. So that was just a bit of an overview on Bhutan. So now to go to the tours that we offer. All of the tours are on the website. You can click on the YellowWood website and take a look at the different itineraries, but just quickly to go through them with you. The 2 main escorted tours that we offer, we have one for hikers, which is the Trans-Bhutan Trail, and one version for non-hikers, those of you who don't want to spend as much time walking. Both of them visit the key sites and a lot of the great places you'll want to see in Bhutan, so you're not going to miss out. It's just a different way of seeing the environment. And we have multiple departures, multiple confirmed departures throughout the year. I mentioned before, we do have a special departure in October that ties in with 2 of the festivals in Thimphu and Gangte. There is, again, one version for hikers and one version for non-hikers. Those are also confirmed. So they're going ahead in October. And beyond all of that, we do also offer bespoke itineraries. So if there are places you really want to visit, if there are festivals, for example, the Black-necked Crane Festival that you really want to attend, please call us. We can chat through the options for you, but really there are lots of different variations that are possible. So if you have any questions about departures, about logistics, about tours, then the team are ready and waiting to hear from you. You can call or drop us an email. Otherwise, if you have any questions about Bhutan or any of my travels, any of my stories, please fire them away now. And I hope you've really enjoyed it, and thank you for sticking with me. So please, if there are any questions, do go ahead.
Just to jump in, thank you so much for that, Sarah. That was a really fantastic overview. We haven't had any questions come in on the chat specifically. So if anyone does have anything, please do ping it in now. Oh yeah, quick question about acclimatization to the altitude.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it really you're not going to be going up to the really high levels. Most of the tours, the highest you'll be getting to is about 3,000 meters. So generally speaking, there will be some acclimatization. You're not going to struggle as much as you might do in other Himalayan destinations. I would say the first few days, keeping things slow, drinking plenty of water. I've been to many places at high elevations, and I've found that's been really the key. Going slowly, like literally going really slowly, half pace, and drinking plenty of water, and also not eating too much on the first few days. Then just gradually ease yourself in, and you should be absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Following up, another question, are the Bhutanese vegetarians?
Do you know, it's a really good question, and actually something that surprised me, because initially I thought they would be, but the answer is no, they're not. So meat is available. However, no meat is slaughtered in Bhutan. So all of the meat is imported from India. So that's how they get around the Buddhist belief of not harming any animals. Quite bizarre, but yes, if you like chicken and you want to eat meat, you can do so in Bhutan. But I would say that a lot of the diet is based on vegetables, just purely because it's a very agricultural community. And some of my favorite dishes were things like there's one called, I can't remember what it is in Bhutanese, but it's essentially cheesy chilies. So chilies with lots of cheese on top, and cheesy potatoes. And they are both delicious. So definitely try those.
Brilliant. There's a couple more questions which I'll answer. One is how long is
Go
the
for it.
tour? So all of our sort of standard shop window group itineraries are 9 days long. That being said, you can tack on additional days where you do need a guide in country, but obviously we can sort those out for you if you want bespoke additions to those group tours, or you can obviously do a fully bespoke trip for yourself or yourself and a partner or a group of friends or family, and that can be as long or short as you like. One thing I will say is because of the sustainable development fee and the visa processing which is tied up, it's one of the same process because obviously you have to pay for the number of nights in advance you're in Bhutan, $100 per night to the government. Once that received, we then process your visa and then send it to you. So you have to know exactly how long you're planning to spend in Bhutan in advance, which is obviously why going through a business like ours makes that much easier. And then again, the level of fitness for trekking and our supplies carried and supported. Yes, you will only have a day pack with you, water bottle, rain jacket, etc., etc. All of your supplies will be transported in our vehicles from whether it's a hotel or a guest house, from place to place, and then you'll trek from day to day to those places to meet back up with your supplies. So no. And then the level of trekking, I mean, it's an intermediate trek. Again, once you've acclimatized to the altitude, it's not a military route march. You're there to enjoy it. But any further logistical questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with the team. Another question there in terms of the lodgings. Yeah, so as mentioned, we try to use local guest houses wherever possible, obviously putting money back into the local communities. But then we use Bhutanese owned hotels in the city as well. The flight details we can assist you with. Well, Sarah, do you want to talk about the flights just quickly?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the main routes into there are only what makes it quite tricky is that there are only two airlines that fly in to Bhutan, Bhutanese Airlines, and Druk Air is actually the most popular. They're great airlines. I've flown with Druk a few times. The main ways that you would come in, Delhi is via Delhi is probably the fastest. You will maybe have to get a sort of transit visa to go through Delhi. Otherwise, the other option is Bangkok, but I've done that before, but it's quite a lengthy way round. Or you can go via Kathmandu. And I quite enjoyed doing it that way. I spent some time in Nepal before, and as I mentioned, you get on that flight coming from Kathmandu to Paro, if it's a clear day, you have an opportunity to see Everest. So you're getting a free flyby as well. So that would be my recommendation. And then more recently, Druk Air started flying via Dubai as well. So that's another option. But I
Brilliant.
would say it's because the flights are, they're not daily necessarily from all of those places. I do think it's worth, if you're specific about dates for something like a festival, it's better to book earlier than later, just to make sure you secure your seats on those flights into Bhutan.
Absolutely. And YellowWood, we're a ground handler, which means we will pick you up from Paro Airport. We could even organise your stay in Nepal as well, which we've done for some of our groups. Transfer you, take you all around the country and take you back to the airport. We won't book your flights for you, but absolutely we can advise you on the best ones to take for your particular date. So just get in touch with the team. Final question, what kind of medical care does one have access to in Bhutan should the need arise?
Actually, the medical, I mean, as I mentioned before, medical care is free for citizens, so they have got a really decent medical system set up. But as with any trip, I would say insurance is essential. That goes without saying. I wouldn't be concerned if you're going to Bhutan that you're not going to have sufficient care. And actually, most of even the more rural areas you're visiting, you can easily access within by road or even by helicopter. Their places are reachable. That shouldn't have to happen. But yeah, there's no need for concern. But I would definitely take out travel insurance, and I would say that for anywhere in the world.
Definitely. Well, we won't, medical insurance for our trips is compulsory anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah, they do have a very strong medical infrastructure and actually just a strong infrastructure in general. For
Yeah.
people who like luxury, for example, I'm actually shocked at the level of luxury hotels that are actually available in some areas of Bhutan.
Oh yeah, I mean the standard is really high. There's some really beautiful mid-range properties as well. There's a lodge where I had the hot stone bath in Gangte called Gangte Lodge, and that's an independent property, but really beautifully run. And not I'd say it was a sort of middle price range, so not as expensive as some of the Como or the Six Senses hotels that you find in Bhutan, but really authentic. And yes, there is a great infrastructure. As I mentioned before, there is a helicopter service for some of these lodges that you can move between them quite quickly. The roads are good. They're winding. That's one thing. That's the terrain. But the drives are very beautiful. There are also what made me laugh. One of my first visits. There were lots of like slow down, no hurry signs everywhere. And that's a life lesson, I think, not just for the roads, but general everyday living.
Brilliant. One person has said, I'm 77 but very fit. Would the treks be manageable? I would say yes, they would be, because also you're being because we're doing different sections and the most beautiful sections of this middle part of the Trans-Bhutan Trail. Obviously, it would take over a full month to walk it end to end of the country. you're there, you're with a group, you're fully supported with local professional guides. And also, if you're really tired one day, you can take a day off because you could just be driven to the next accommodation. So that's always, we these are walking tours to explore the country, as I said. So yes, definitely. But any questions, do get in touch with us for a longer conversation. Question for you, Sarah. Given a once in a lifetime
Mm.
trip, which option is preferred, April to May or October to November?
Oh, that's very hard. It depends if you want to go to one of the festivals, I suppose. Personally, because I love wildlife, I'd probably be inclined to opt for the autumn option, purely because then there's a chance to see the blackneck cranes. As I said before, they arrive at the end of October, and you could then try and tie in the blackneck crane festival, and that would be pretty special. I've not been to that festival myself. It's on my list to go and do, but it takes place in Gangtay, which I said before is one of my favorite places. October's also a really beautiful time for trekking. It's much cooler, crisp days. So it's a hard option because both are beautiful. In April, you're going to have the lovely wildflowers, but I think, yeah, I'd be more inclined to say October, November purely for that opportunity to see the birds.
And then, yes, are there any festivals in April? There are the two. There's the Para Festival that was mentioned, and
Yeah.
also the Rhododendron Festival. And obviously in
Yes.
October, you have the two main Dimpo and Gangte festivals as well.
Yeah. And they're all great events. As I said before, the a lot of those dances are replicated in the different festivals. Each event has its own specialism and it's celebrating a specific thing or a person, but many of the dances are repeated. So it's not that any one festival is better than another. I think you'd still have a fantastic experience at whichever one you went to.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I think we're way over time. There's a lot of thank yous coming into the chat here. But yeah, Sarah, thank you once again, as always, for your very insightful knowledge. And thank you all for joining this presentation.
Yes, and thank you all for bearing with me while I dealt with my laptop. I'm very pleased you all stayed to listen, and I hope I've inspired some of you to visit because it is honestly one of my favorite destinations, and it would be really a fantastic time to visit in the next, well, to visit now. So,
Brilliant. Well, you know where we are, everyone. Thanks again and have a good day. Bye bye.
bye bye.